For inviting me to Ann Arbor to enjoy the beautiful weather. And thank you all for coming at this lunch hour. I'm really honored to speak to you about traditional Chinese poetry, and mainly I will focus on imagery, which is considered the essence of traditional Chinese poetry. Today I will first talk to you about a few general features of Chinese poetry, and then we will discuss 4 widely used imageries for Chinese poetry. China was considered a nation for songbirds or country of poetry. Be aware that the verb tense is was, right? It's past tense. Nowadays, of course, it's very different because so many distractions or so many entertainments. The writing of poetry, which has been considered the most imaginative and loftiest of all literary forms, was in China an everyday undertaking of intellectuals. They could weave out songs out of materials of daily life and occupation. So there's a long tradition for writing poetry and appreciating poetry in China. This is the first poetical anthology in China, which was compiled by Confucius himself in 6th century BCE period. And it contains 305 poems. Majority of them are folk songs. And Confucius used it to teach his disciples. And it was also a main subject of the civil service examinations in China. So then most Chinese scholars could memorize and recite these poems. And up to now, still it appears in China's language and literature textbooks from, I think, middle school through college. After about 1,000 years, Chinese poetry reached this golden age in the Tang Dynasty, which is from 618 through 907. And this period produced lots of great poets. Just before that, somebody asked me why Tang Dynasty was considered the golden age. I think probably just because of time, after 1,000 years of development, it reached this maturity and golden age, including famous names like Li Bai and Du Fu and many, many others. So many people compared Tang China to Elizabethan England when a group of great poets lived, including William Shakespeare and many, many other people. Right? We can see on this book cover from China, and Li Bai and Shakespeare are side by side. So I want to talk to you about a few special features of Chinese poetry. Let me ask you a question. Okay, have you read any Chinese poems either in Chinese or in English translation? If you have, yeah, raise it. Great, okay, quite many actually. So can you tell me any features of Chinese poems? Or what struck you first when you read your first Chinese poem in English or Chinese? Or any differences between English and poems?
Well, just the few that I've read, maybe this isn't representative, but they sometimes include nature, and also they sometimes there's like a hidden meaning or a philosophy. Those are the 2 things.
Yeah, right. Okay, very good. Lots of nature poems, and also people use poets use these poems to express their philosophical inclinations, ideas. Very good. Any other ideas or features you think which are very different from English poems?
So images are very important, and often the connection between them are not explicit.
Okay, very good. Images, right? Because that's the topic for today's talk. Okay. Also, if you take a look at this poem, This particular poem, you can see there are 4 lines vertically arranged, right? 4 lines, and each line has 5 Chinese characters. So altogether, it has 20 characters, and it's a complete poem. The last 2 lines here, no, sorry. These 2 lines are just notes by the calligraphy. So we have 4 lines. So it's really short, really short. So this is the shortest form. So it's, it has only 4 lines and with 5 characters in each line, altogether 20 characters. So then people may ask, how come such a short poem can express profound feelings and meanings? So then one thing we may relate to is the Chinese language and even Chinese people's way of thinking. It is different from Western language or Western people's way of thinking. For example, Chinese language is usually concise, and also its grammar is very flexible. Our Chinese language students often complain that the characters are so difficult to write. To really hear somebody to complain about Chinese grammar, because it's very flexible, it's easy to learn. For example, in Chinese grammar, something can be omitted, right? Or some, like, first we may say, like some easy part, like Chinese language does not have plural and singular forms of nouns, and it does not have verb conjugations, and many words can be omitted, including, for example, pronouns, personal pronouns, adverbs, prepositions, conjunctions, these words. And also, many other words can be omitted as long as the context is clear. Okay. For example, right? In daily life, right, people do this. Right? For example, if a Chinese person come across a friend on campus or in the street, then how they greet each other. Right? This is one of the typical versions. Right? People don't usually say like "你好吗," right? First, this is not for friends. Right? So the textbooks sometimes it's like a kind of this video bookish. Right? So Chinese people, if you see a friend, you never say 你好吗, right? But this is always in the first lesson of Chinese textbooks. Right? 你好吗? 我很好. 你呢? 我也很好. I'm very often actually was embarrassed by this kind of greetings when a friend or a student who knows Chinese said to me 你好吗? I should usually stuck there. I don't know how to answer. Right? It's true, right? Then finally I thought I should respond and said 我很好, 你呢? Right? Then he said 我也很好. Then we completed this short conversation. Right? So, however, Chinese people don't do this, right? What do they do? Even 你好, 你好, it's kind of too formal for friends, right? Don't say 你好, 你好. If I saw a colleague, I usually don't say 你好. So there are different ways to say it. So this is one way, very popular way. 吃了吗? So literally means have you had a meal, right? Or dinner or lunch, right? Or whatever. But it's an incomplete sentence grammatically. Right? You can notice if you know Chinese. Basically, it's 3 characters. Only one is a substantial character here. Is a 吃, right? The verb to eat. Le and ma the question mark, and le is a kind of to show the past tense. So what is omitted here in this short sentence? 吃了吗? Subject, right? Or the pronoun. 你 should be 你 you, right? 你吃了吗? Right? And anything else? Object is omitted, right? 你吃了饭了吗? 你吃了晚饭了吗? So, but if we say 你吃了晚饭了吗? Then people would think, wow, maybe you want to invite me to dinner, right? It's kind of so formal, right? But so that 吃了吗 just a greeting. And I really saw a TV interview when people talking about the older times in Beijing, people greet each other. They just, you always say 吃了吗? And he said, a famous scholar, he said, once he went to a public restroom and somebody said to him, 吃了吗? It's kind of funny, but this is really a form of greeting. It shows that many things are omitted, many words are omitted. It's in daily conversation, and it's also true in poetry writing. I'll give you an example. Okay. We don't have a blackboard or whiteboard here. I can write, but I'll say to you one English poetic line. Okay, you try to remember it. Okay, then we can discuss it. Give you a test of your short memory. Okay. The line goes like this. When you and I were drinking wine together, okay, and this is an English poetic line. Then if we ask Li Bai to write this line, he would revise it, of course. Then how could he revise? Let's see. When you and I are not necessary, right? Because the pronouns are almost always omitted in Chinese poetry. So we cross out. Were, right, drinking wine together. Why we need a word? If I write to you, talk about something past in the past, we don't need this kind of verb tense, word for word tense. So then we omit it. And when is an adverb, we don't need it. And drinking is a verb, we need it. It's important, substantial. Drinking wine. Why should we talk about drinking wine? If not wine, what else? Drink water. So, and all Chinese poets in the ancient times were alcoholic. So, definitely about wine. So we don't need this word. And together, of course, if we drink, of course, together. So then we cross out all the rest of the words. Only one word left is drinking. So then, what is this word in Chinese? If we know Chinese, drinking. yin, right? Modern language is 喝, pre-modern period say yin. So then just one character. So that's why the poem can be so short. And this is one reason, but the other one, equally important, is the imagery, what we will talk about today. Chinese people like to use lots of images to speak, to express their feelings, rather than just talking about the logic, the reasonings. So then it's also save lots of words of space. And these images sometimes became conventional. For example, falling autumn leaves refer to personal or dynastic declines, kind of fixed images. So today we'll talk about 4 commonly used images. The first one is the bird. Birds are always interesting to humans, and for poets in particular. The word of birds and its endless variation of colors and sizes and formations and emotions all these kind of variations have been an immensely rich source for inspiration and metaphor. So people use a lot of birds' images in poetry writing. Because they fly, they carry associations of freedom and spirit on their wings. And because they communicate in songs that are alien to human language, but are musically evocative of human feelings. So we attribute songs, we attribute characters and stories to them. They are distinctly different from us, but we often see ourselves in them, and we use them to consider our place in the universe. So I will talk about a few types of bird images. The first one is paired birds. Paired birds are a symbol for conjugal bliss, especially in China, because there are a kind of special birds called yuanyang in Chinese. And these birds, one male bird and one female bird, always together. And so they are considered lifelong couples. Yuanyang, I think, is translated by many people as Mandarin ducks. But Mandarin ducks, or some people translate it as lovebirds. I think Mandarin ducks is more special and unique. However, it sounds like a little bit like a dish's name. So people wrote quite many about this kind of images. How these two lines are quoted from a poem by Du Fu. Du Fu is one of the most famous poets in China. He is from the Tang Dynasty. He lived through a major civil war, which is called the Anlushan Rebellion in English or Anshi Zhiluan in Chinese. It lasted for 80 years, and after these 80 years, Tang Dynasty's, Tang Empire's households reduced by 3/4. So we can see it's a very cruel war. And Du Fu is a firm Confucian scholar. So he wrote many poems to describe people's sufferings, including his own, during the wartime. And this is a narrative poem. It talks about the story that one young couple married in the evening. However, the husband had to go to the frontier to fight next morning because he was drafted to the army. So Du Fu criticized this kind of cruel drafting system of the government. These two are the last lines of the poem, and it's this bride's voice. And she says, "I lift my head and look at hundreds of birds flocking, big or small, they must fly in pairs." So clearly, Du Fu used this imagery to express this bride's or the couple's lament. Their life were not as good as birds. Another popular imagery is the caged bird. We know birds symbolize freedom. However, a caged bird, of course, refers to confinement. This poem is by Tao Qian, or Tao Yuanming, one of the most important poets in Chinese history, and arguably the most important poet before the Tang Dynasty. And he lived in the period of a period which is called the Six Dynasties. which lasted for about more than 300 years. In China, coincidentally, most major dynasties lasted for about 300 years, such as the Tang Dynasty, Song Dynasty, Ming Dynasty, Qing Dynasty, all about 300 years. And Han Dynasty is a little longer, lasted for about 400 years, but it was divided into two parts, former Han and later Han. But this period, about 300 years, has like 6 dynasties in quick succession. And so on average, each dynasty lasted for about 50 years. So what kind of period is this? Therefore, each dynasty lasts about 50 years. Even we don't know the history, right? But we can imagine. All the dynasty changes were violent, right? By civil war, assassinations, palace coups, and rebels, all these things, right? So then we know this period is not a good period for living there, right? It's the politics was dark and the governments were corrupted. So Tao Qian lived in this period, and he served in the government for 13 years. Then he resigned his position as a county magistrate. And he returned to his home in the farm. So this poem's title is called Returning to Dwell in Gardens and Fields. He returned home and he enjoyed his life as a recluse, hermit, very much because the life was basically peaceful and quiet. However, it's not easy either, because like sometimes once a fire destroyed his house, and the other time a crop failure brought his family to starvation. However, he never went back to serve the government. So to his contemporaries, he is remarkable, not because he's a poet, but because he's a man of integrity, who preferred a life of poverty and hardship to comfort and respectability that had to be purchased at the price of compromising his principles. So this is a couplet, 2 lines from his poem when he just returned home. And we can see he wrote about bird and fish. It reads, a caged bird yearns for its former woods. Fish in the pool yearns for a long ago deeps. Very famous lines, and just about these animals, but we can see what he really wants to say. He employs these 2 images to encapsulate his view of his past. An experience similar to the animal, right, or the bird or the fish, captured and wrenched away from their natural habits, for which they long in anguish. Right? So this is his actual autobiographical voice, talking about himself. So we can see another use of the bird image or imagery. Birds are usually, I would say, it's peaceful. However, sometimes they are also, because they are small and not powerful, so easy to be startled. And this is another poem by Du Fu, very famous poem by Du Fu. He wrote when he was trapped in the capital Chang'an. When these rebellious troops attacked the capital Chang'an, they quickly took the capital. And Du Fu fled away with his family to temporarily settle down in the village. And however, when he heard that the new government was established in somewhere in the northeast part of China, he tried to go there to join the new court. But on the way, he was captured by the rebellious troops and was taken back to the capital. Although he was not in prison, but he was trapped there. And his family was far away from him. So he wrote this poem when it's the spring season and to express his distressed feelings. This is called so-called the regulated verse, which has 8 lines, and each line has 5 characters, so we call it a pentasyllabic regulated verse. These 4 lines are first half of the poem, and they read as a kingdom smashed, its hills and rivers still here. Spring in the city, plants and trees grow deeper. Moved by the moment, flowers splash with tears. Alarmed at parting, birds startled the heart. The first couplet observes that nature cares nothing for human disaster. Hills and rivers remains the same when empire falls. Grass grow and the water thicken when spring comes. So the title is a view in spring, right? It's his view of spring. However, the second couplet discovers that nature is not indifferent at all. Because we can see, moved by the moment, flowers splash with tears. And then, of course, birds startle the heart. And these are 2 famous lines. And the translation is very good, not my translation. And also almost word by word. You can see the original Chinese lines has 5 characters. In English, almost 5 characters, 5 substantial words. Moved by the moment, flowers splash with tears. Right? Very good translation because it's also keeps the original flavor, right? Original structure. So it still sounds like a kind of ambiguous. We say ambiguous probably is a negative word if professor comments on students' papers, right? This paragraph is ambiguous, that means it's not good. However, for poetry writing, especially Chinese poetry, because they use so many images, ambiguity is probably a strategy, right, to write poems. So here people would ask question, flowers splash tears. Which tears, or what tears, or whose tears? Right? Do you have any answer? Why flowers splash you with tears?
I would prefer splashed with tears.
Splashed.
Splashed with tears.
Yeah.
But it's clearly bringing in the poet.
Yeah.
He's the one who's crying.
I would think that, however, they are copied from Stephen Over, you know. So I could only trust his translation. And I had the same idea, actually, splash with tears. I think this is clear that it's not it's flowers tears, right? But because, right, something poured out it. Yeah, very good point. So, well, people had different interpretations because it's a kind of ambiguity, right? And people would say, when I teach class, my students would say, well, this is the poet's tears, right? Because he's so sad, so he cried. And some people would say, well, these are more general, like people's tears, including soldiers, or like family members of soldiers, and anybody else, many interpretations, right? And all these are fine, right? We can put them together because in this way, the good things for ambiguity because it leaves a lot of room for interpretation or even imagination. And this is also one feature of Chinese language. Chinese language usually are not so accurate, not so direct. So people would say, well, Chinese language is a language for writing poetry, not for writing legal documents. And Western languages like English or French usually very accurate. You have leaving no room for your interpretation or misunderstanding, right? But like this, you can understand it in many different ways. And however, these are deep level of interpretation. On the surface, the first level, because the title is View in Spring, we know the poet is looking at the spring scene either through the window in his room or outside in the yard or in the street. Then he sees some water drops on the petals. Right? So these are either morning dews fall on the petals, or raindrops sprinkle the blossoms. So this is the first level, the immediate scene, and then the second level we can understand in more profound way. Similarly, is the second next line, birds startle the heart. Birds are usually very peaceful, enjoyable. However, during this wartime, right, they became very vulnerable, and people are also very vulnerable. So they were easy to be scared or even startled by little birds. The last imagery for this section is a lonely bird. And I think I need to speed up a little bit, and the time is, we don't have much time left. So we said a paired bird refer to some marriage or fidelity. However, sometimes we also have an image of a lonely bird. Even in daily life, we see, because birds very often they fly in flocks. However, if we see a lonely bird, one single bird, we will feel kind of loneliness either for the bird or for ourselves. So this is another poem by Du Fu. He wrote in his last years when he tried to go back to the capital, and then finally he actually died on the way. And obviously we can see this is his own image, right? It reads, tossed about by winds, what is my semblance of heaven and earth, a single sand gown. Du Fu explicitly provides the image of himself, although he didn't spell out the nature of this comparison. We can easily imagine that this picture that a cow soaring between earth and heaven, and so we can see its loneliness and it's disoriented against this big drop. So this is Du Fu's self-portrait. So this is about the bird imagery. And then now another commonly used imagery is cloud. Clouds are used a lot in poetry all over the world. Now let's see quickly how Chinese poets use it. We may skip this poem. we go to this this point. Okay. The poet is named Wang Wei. Wang Wei is another major Tang poet, and he is also a devout Buddhist. During Tang time, the three major religious / philosophical traditions in China flourish at the same time. Those are Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. And interestingly, three major Tang-Danese poets, Li Bai, Du Fu, and Wang Wei, represents these three traditions. Du Fu, we just mentioned, was a Confucian scholar, a firm Confucian scholar. Li Bai was an enthusiastic Taoist, and Du Fu was a devout Buddhist. And so, even in his poems, we can see kind of Buddhist hue here. This poem is like 6 lines. It's not very typical in China, and we can read it. I got off my horse, offering you wine. The title is Parking, and ask you where you are going. You say that nothing turned out as you wished. You go home to rest by South Mountain. Go off then. I will ask nothing more. White clouds there that never end. Wang Wei was parting with a friend, and seems that he's not very successful in leaving the capital. We don't know exactly the reason. However, it's possible that because during that time, one important thing for everybody's life is the civil service examination. It's probably more important than 高考, right? 高考 because only for right, just call it high school graduates. But really, this is civil service examination for all the people, and for their lifelong. Maybe some people will take the exam again and again until 50 years old, but still cannot get a degree, probably. So it's so important. So many people just travel long distance to the capital to take, and if they failed, then they go back or went back home, prepare for next year. So it's possible, or maybe the other possibility is this friend was demoted, right? So then he went back to South Mountain, the mountain near capital China. Then that's 2 lines. Go off then, I will ask nothing more. White clouds there that never end. This is an open-end poem, right? Leaving interpretations to his friend and to the readers in later generations too. Right? And then, what are your interpretations? Why I said white clouds? It has nothing to do with this parting of friends leaving the capital, right? But there should be some connections.
Is it that life goes on? It's sort of some sorrow?
Very good, right? The life goes on just like white clouds, right? It's unfolding, moving, right? Endlessly, right? So then you see the white clouds there, right? So it's and then we can have some other interpretation too, right? Based on this image.
Would you say the original language?
Original language, okay.
What's the title of that?
The title is 送别. 送别, right? 下马饮君酒. So I cannot remember the ever right. The last one is 白云无尽时. 白云无尽时. Yeah. 归卧 the number 4, the 归卧南山陲. Something like that.
That's enough.
送别. Yeah, you can check out that. Yeah.
There might be an association with clouds and mountains. There's the idea that clouds come out of caves and mountains.
Mm-hmm.
Home is very important in the poem as well.
Yeah, right,
So
okay.
yeah,
right. That's very good because he went back to home, probably, right? Or a retreat. This is Zhongnanshan. It's a mountain next to, in suburb of China capital, and the home for many kind of rich people or retreat over there. Actually, one way had a retreat in Zhongnanshan. So yeah, it's another interpretation. Right? Maybe you can also say something like, yeah, for example, clouds often hide something, right? But at the same time also symbolize something it conceals. Right? So then this is kind of Buddhist idea. And actually this poem itself like a Buddhist practice. Because in Buddhism, very often when a disciple asks his master a question, then his master gave a non-answer, right? So it means this answer had nothing to do or not directly related to a question. Then let the disciple to think. And in this way to jolt him out of like a conventional way of thinking to like realize some truth intuitively. So this is kind of Buddhist way.
But you know, the white clouds, that imagery, is like a Rorschach. When you think about poetry or any literary creation, you have to think about not only the author, but the audience. And so the listener or the reader or the audience will bring whatever fantasy that person would have in reading this. And they could have, you could have hundreds of interpretations.
Right. Yeah. But exactly, very good comment. It's kind of reader response, right? Using a modern history, modern theory.
Is there a significance to the color of the clouds in this poem, that they're white?
Yeah, so this is another good question, right? Clouds is a concept in China, in Chinese culture. Usually people think of white clouds, right? And it's beautiful, right? And or sometimes like morning rosy clouds, right? And or sun setting, right? Rosy clouds. So either 白云 or 彩云, like white clouds or colorful clouds. So they are usually beautiful. But in English, probably today's a cloudy day, right? So that's kind of dark and gloomy. Right? So they're kind of different. Any other question or comments? Okay. So then we already discussed one poem about clouds. We'll move on to the moon, another major imagery in Chinese poetry, and we will read a few Li Bai's poems. Because Li Bai really likes the moon. He, like this poem says, he likes the moon from his childhood. He said, I did not know the moon when I was little. And I called it a white jade plate. It is also like a mirror from a goddess palace flying over the clouds in the blue sky. So when he was so young, he even didn't know the name of the moon. He already loved it and called it, used two images. One is a jade plate, and the other is a mirror flying in the sky. And Li Bai, actually, this is a favorite object of Li Bai, and his poetry collection has about like over 1,000 poems, about 300 poems about the moon. Not necessarily the major theme, but it talks about the moon. So we can see he's really he really loved the moon. And this is one of his poems. It's probably the most famous poem in China. It's a short poem, right? It's probably the poem that, the first poem for most of the Chinese people, right? When they were young, 3 years old, 4 years old, their parents would teach them this poem, and they don't even know how to read it, or these characters they can memorize and recite. So, moon, this the poem reads, beside my bed, a pool of light. Is it hoarfrost on the ground? I lift my eyes and see the moon. I bend my head and think of home. Why is it so popular in China? Just because moon has association with family reunion in China. Different natural objects have different interpretations in different cultures. In Western culture, probably a moonlit night provides an ideal romantic atmosphere. And young people would sing love songs while playing a lute. But in China, the main association is probably family reunion. So that's why the Moon Festival or the Mid-Autumn Festival is so important. Second next to Chinese New Year. It's an important festival in China.
So it's about love that's unrequited on earth.
I'm sorry.
It's about love
Yeah.
that is not requited,
Yeah.
that's not fulfilled on earth.
Yeah. Right.
So they wait for reunion in the moon.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Would you read that in Chinese?
In Chinese, okay. Yeah. This is every Chinese kid can read it, right? Because it's so popular. And 床前明月光，疑是地上霜。举头望明月，低头思故乡。So we can hear the rhyme, right? The kind of rhythm here. Beautiful poem, very easy. For students who have 1-year Chinese, they can read this poem. 20 characters, they definitely know 18 from out of the 20 characters. Only 2 maybe they don't know, have not learned it in first year. So a very easy poem. Actually, I have to stop here. So then, just move very quickly over these slides. Moon as a companion. This is Li Bai's signature posture. When he was alone, he lifted his cups and invited Moon to be his companion. And with his shadows, it became point of 3. So he has a kind of wild imagination. And omniscient Moon, because Moon is in the sky and watch the changes, dynasty changes, personal changes all the time. So all the heroes of history are gone, but Moon is still there. This is a common theme of Chinese poetry, a comparison of the eternity of nature with the transience of humankind. We don't have time to go to the details. Last one is a river. River, because people thought this is kind of sustenance of life, forever renewing the fertility of land. So it appears in Chinese and the poetry very often. River coming down from heaven, and the river flowing endlessly, and sweeping river. All these famous poets. Works by famous poets and their famous lines, but I probably don't have time to go to the details. Okay, so today we have a very quick discussion of these 4 major images in Chinese poetry, and we know it's so important kind of soul of Chinese poetry. So we can say simply, no imagery, no poetry. Okay, thank you very much for your time here.